Okay, welcome everyone to Tetrate Tech Talks. It is April 15th, Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern Time. My name is Eitan Suez, and I'd like to welcome you to our Tech Talks. We are broadcasting live to LinkedIn Live and YouTube, and I would love to get to know everyone that's tuning in. Feel free to sort of drop a hello message in the chat. Tell us where you're sort of coming from. It'd be great to hear from you. My name is Eitan Suez, and I would like to welcome you to this week's episode of Tetrate Tech Talks. What I'm showing off here in the background is our landing page, which you can find at this cryptic URL. No fear, I will put all of these links in the chat in just a moment. But yeah, and on our landing page, you can find a ton of wonderful information. I'll make myself a little smaller and begin our episode as we sort of focus in on what we're going to be discussing. Our topic is adopting Istio at Salesforce. Last week we had we did a technical demo. This week we're sort of doing sort of the flip side of it, which is to bring on a guest and to interview a guest. So we've got a great episode lined up for you and a lot for me to go through. So let me bring up episode 3 here and walk you through what we're going to be discussing. And so I've got 2 guests waiting in the wings for our upcoming interview. Let me check real quick if anybody is made any comments. Okay, great. So what are Tetrate Tech Talks? If this is your first time, it's a new series of broadcasts that we recently kicked off here at Tetrate. This episode is episode 3. Feel free to rummage through our playlists and catch up if you haven't watched our prior episodes. But these broadcasts are all about learning and sharing knowledge and coming together as a community. It's about not just the technical aspect, but also the people aspect, getting to know the diverse members of our community. And that's why I'm excited about this particular episode, because we're going to begin on that journey and get to know all of the people who are working and contributing to Istio. And last but not least is the objective of having fun while doing it. So I'm your host, Eitan Suez. I come to you from Austin, Texas. And my guests are in the United States. I will introduce them in just a minute after we sort of go through our the announcements that we typically do in each episode. So again, if you're a repeat visitor, we welcome you. Thank you for attending and listening. We hope you find this content useful and interesting. In past episodes, we talked about Istio and Service Mesh, and specifically onboarding VMs onto the mesh, Canary upgrading Istio, and these are both topics that are separate and complementary facets to the types of things that we need to concern ourselves as we start looking towards transitioning from just evaluating a technology to how to adopt it and operationalize it. And so I hope these topics are fitting, and this week's episode is a perfect segue onto this conversation in terms of how do you adopt Istio in the enterprise. Hopefully we'll be able to learn from a company that's been doing it in earnest for some time now, and we're eager to learn about it more. So a few announcements. We have an upcoming free workshop that my colleague Peter is going to be giving this coming week. It's called the Istio WASM Extension Workshop. And if you're interested in learning more about WebAssembly and specifically how you can use it as a mechanism of extensibility with Istio and Envoy, register for that free workshop. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. Also, I would like to mention that Tetrate has a certified administrator exam. This is what the landing page looks like. If you've taken the Kubernetes certifications, whether it's the CCAD, the developer certification, or the administrator certification, or the security specialist certification, it might make sense to sort of continue down that track and consider signing up and registering for the certification exam for Istio. And while we're talking about certification, I'd like to include conversations that we've had on our community channel this past week. And there was a message from Rakesh, who posted a blog about his preparation log and experience taking that certification exam. So I've dropped the link on our landing page, and if you want to sort of learn from his experience, definitely do that. Also, I would like to mention that I am hoping to have Peter, who is a colleague of mine at Tetrate, who helped put together that certification exam, and interview him and ask him about what we can learn about his experience, sort of bringing that product to market, so to speak. And maybe we can sort of, maybe without cheating, of course, get a few tips and hints for ways of preparing for the exam. I'm going to be dropping also a coupon code. So we have a 30% off coupon for Istio certification. You don't need to memorize that. I'll be dropping it in the chat in just in a few minutes. Yeah, and if you want also to note that Tetrate has a landing page called the Tetrate Academy, where you will find also free courses, Istio Fundamentals and Envoy Fundamentals, that also entitle you to additional discounts towards that certification exam. Okay, so this is an exciting time of year because we've got coming up very soon, the week of April 25th through 29th, the Istio Con Conference. This is an online conference. And the program has been published now for a couple of weeks. Eric Brewer is going to be keynoting, and there's going to be plenty of sessions. I'm happy to also announce that I'll be doing an Istio 0 to 60 session, a workshop that's really designed for folks who really know Kubernetes, but maybe are new to service mesh. Also, looking a little further afield, in the month of May, we've got Service MeshCon and KubeCon EU happening in Valencia, Spain. And I want to put on your radar the fact that Tetrate will be there in force. We're going to have more than a dozen people on the ground, and we are sponsoring a one-day immersion day event for all things service mesh. And this is a free event, and we'll be making a bunch of announcements. And overall, look forward to the announcements and this event. We're going to have some speakers who are going to join us, who are very, very well known, who are founders of the technologies that we're looking at every day. Matt Klein from Envoys, our own Zach Butcher, who's head of product at Tetrate, and Lewis Ryan, who's Istio core committer from Google. So if you can join us there in Valencia, that would be terrific. And then we'll have to figure out how to do, maybe we'll do a future episode on a Friday there on the ground at the conference. And then nearer afield, we've launched a series of, we call them roadshows. There's an Austin roadshow. This is a live event, and that's I guess, the refreshing part of this. And there's also going to be one the following week in Seattle. And so if you happen to be in Central Texas or nearby in Dallas or Houston or Austin, San Antonio, do join us. This is going to be fun. We're going to essentially host you for an afternoon event at the Alamo Draft House and talk about service mesh, and we'll do it happy hour afterwards. So that's going to be a lot of fun as well. All right, so much for the announcements. I know it's a lot that I'm throwing at you. And again, remember that all of these things that I'm showing you are available on the landing page. So you can just go there and grab those links. And so without further ado, I would like to talk about the main course for today, which is Adopting Istio at Salesforce. This is an interview with Pratima Nambiar from Salesforce. And I also have the privilege to say that I'm not going to be the interviewer. I managed to wrangle some time away from our CEO, Varun Talwar, who is going to be conducting the interview. So Pratima is a principal architect at Salesforce. And Salesforce was an early adopter of service mesh technology. And Pratima was intimately involved in this effort and can give us, hopefully, some information that we can learn from. And it's also worth mentioning that in conjunction with this interview, you might want to check out the link that I'm citing here on this page, which is an Istio community meeting recording from approximately a year ago, around May or June of 2021, where it was the last time we got an update from Salesforce on their adoption of Istio. Our interviewer, Varun Talwar, is the CEO at Tetrate. And Varun was on the team at Google that created Istio. So he's one of the founders of Tetrate, but also has been with the technology from the very, very beginning and actually helped give us the technology. And so I'd like to welcome Varun as well. Tetrate, of course, is on a mission to bring service mesh to the enterprise. So I cannot think of a better person to have on to interview Pratima. So without further ado, I'd like to bring them on. So welcome Varun and welcome Pratima. And what I'd like to do is sort of fade into the background and let you all sort of take it away. I'll be back after the interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eitan. Welcome, Pratima.
Thanks, Varun. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. So I think Eitan set us up all in the context. So let's just start off with right from an early journey, like what, maybe an overview of what Salesforce was looking at and why did it even consider moving in the direction of Envoy and Istio in the first place?
Yeah, I think it was about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, we made a architectural decision to move from a monolith-based architecture to adopting more microservices based architecture because it was getting really hard for us to continue to develop and build more features with a monolith. And as part of that journey, we started to build out microservices, but then we run into these common problems that you face with communication between microservices. This includes, security implications. If you have your, now you're making these calls instead of it being an in-process call, it's a out-of-process call to a different service. The network inconsistencies that you have to deal with, lack of visibility into this traffic, and also having to deal with running these services on dynamic infrastructure. And the thing that you're calling could die on and get upgraded, et cetera, on its own. And as a client, you have to be resilient to that. So all of these, common problems that you see with service-to-service communication, we invested in service mesh technologies to help solve for those common problems. So that we could scale. If you have 5 services, you could do it in any way that you want. But when you start talking about scale and number of services, the service mesh technology really helps solve for it at that scale.
Yeah. So you touched on 2 good points, which I often get asked for, like at what threshold should we say, okay, now I should move to service mesh architecture? Is it based on number of services? Is it based on complexity of communication, but not number of services? Is it based on my, mandate from security? At what threshold should I say? And the other question that I have for you is, what were you doing before service mesh architectures?
So for the first point, I think it's hard to answer the threshold question because we are an enterprise company. As you're probably aware, Salesforce has a very high bar for trust. And trust includes security and compliance that our customers expect from us. It includes high availability of our platform from an external customer perspective. So from the get-go, given the business that Salesforce is in, the security compliance was a big deal, and so was building an internal platform that can be resilient to these types of transient failures that I talked about before. It was important so that we can, have, from an external customer perspective, you get that high availability of Salesforce as a product. And then as part of that, reducing the mean time to detect, mean time to repair when there's a problem is also important for a company like ours. So for us, it was important from day one. So when we had like 5 services, we started off with Finagle libraries embedded in the 2 services, but then we moved to a out-of-process sidecar that was not Envoy based, and we were able to build out that infrastructure while the service owners didn't have to worry about it. And then we switched to Envoy because Envoy had better performance, a better control plane API, etc. And at that time there was no Istio. Istio did not exist as a product, as an open source product. So we built our own in-house control plane with very minimal capabilities. I'd say maybe even tens of services. We started to, even before that, we knew, because we're an enterprise company, we had to adopt something like Mesh. Yeah.
Got it. So do you agree that security and resiliency were your primary reasons for adoption?
Yes.
Along with reducing time for operations and troubleshooting when things are going wrong.
I'd say security followed by resiliency and reliability, and then followed by observability.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. So you also mentioned another interesting one, that you started off building your own control plane, so which is what some companies did. So how was the migration to Istio, and how difficult was it? How much did you have to put in? And what would you tell someone, today, considering building their own control plane?
So we chose to build our own control plane because there was no control plane that existed that we could adopt at that time. It was not because it's not because we didn't find one that didn't meet our requirements. It's just that one did not exist. And from the get-go, we were scanning the horizon for something that would be built as an open source product. So from the get-go, we were pretty our in-house control plane was very narrowly scoped, if you will. We met our business requirements of those days, but did not build out a full-fledged control plane that solved for everything that we would need in the future. It was very narrowly scoped with the intention of, yes, let's watch and see how the industry will evolve and if we can adopt one. So that's what we did. And then the actual migration, because we had kept it so narrowly scoped, when Istio 1.0 came about, we realized that yes, everything that we were looking for was fulfilled by a product like Istio, and we were starting to see a lot of more complex use cases at that time that we didn't want to invest in building into our control plane when we saw a possibility of an open source product that could meet our needs. So that is when we said it's time to switch, and we explored Istio at that time. It didn't fully meet our requirements because although it was very promising, we had to make some changes to it before it could be used at Salesforce.
So, any major ones that you could want to highlight? What changes you had to make?
I think this was like in late 2018. I think the ones that come to mind, the primary one was Salesforce requires us to use an internal CA for those short-lived certificates. And at that time, Istio didn't have support for that. So we added support for that. So we could actually, that was a showstopper for us. We couldn't use it without that. There were some metrics related enhancements that we had to make. Those were the high level ones I'd like to call out. And I'd say, if we were going through that journey today, we probably would use the open source product directly.
Yeah, most of that exists now. So yeah, thanks to some of it is to you and other people, right? So, okay, great. So you got it inside, you had it for like few services. How was the adoption journey inside? Like who was managing it? How did the teams receive it?
So we have a team at Salesforce that manages the service mesh infrastructure. We also have a team that manages our Kubernetes clusters. We run our mesh architecture for different types of infrastructure, including VMs and bare metal. But our Kubernetes infrastructure is managed by a specific team, and our mesh infrastructure is managed by a specific team that I lead, and we have we have internal customers that we work with. So all service owners that want to use mesh are our customers, and we work with them to help them adopt mesh. That's kind of how we are set up.
Right. No, I think that's pretty typical of like a centralized Kubernetes platform, centralized mesh team, and then service teams being the customers of that, so to speak. So did the service teams take it well? Like was there pushback? What did you have to do to address adoption?
The key here is making it easy for teams to adopt, right? So Salesforce, again, has a high bar for some of the trust requirements. So we make it easy for service owners to meet those requirements. So the ease of adoption just enables teams to just, it's a no-brainer at that point. That's kind of how we've approached it. However, there are lots of, over the past year, for example, while we had great support, self-serve support for HTTP, gRPC-based services, not so much for TCP-based services and open source stacks like Cassandra and Storm, etc. So we worked with those teams to kind of figure out what is the pattern to adopt mesh for those types of use cases, and then that's part of the platform that we support now. So the teams have certainly taken it well, I'd say, because the key here is ease of adoption, and so that the service owners can focus on what they have to focus on, which is business logic.
Makes sense. So today, are you, like, in terms of policies, resiliency policies, you specifically mentioned security policies, are you managing it, or are the teams now self-serve doing it themselves?
So for resilience policies, we actually, have a default set of policies that we apply. So that's an integration that we have. We have a config webhook that when you onboard as a HTTP or a gRPC service, for example, you get a default set of resilience policies. And then we allow you to modify certain things as necessary for certain complex use cases. But for the most part, everyone gets a certain base by default. And that's been working out well. And that's been one of the things that's made it easy to adopt. So as a service owner, you don't have to think about resiliency. We are doing the thinking for you, the research and fine tuning as necessary as that evolves. That is one. And with respect to security, we actually, the platform that we run is very much a platform, and it has integrations with security services. So we have partners within the company that we work with for certain types of security features, and that is enabled as an integration, and service owners are able to adopt it self-serve. We are obviously depending on the type of feature, certain things are more easy to adopt, certain things require more of our engagement to sort of educate people. But that is the journey that we go through. As and when we have more and more, if a use case becomes a more broad impact use case, we make sure that by then it is easy to adopt, so that service owners can be self-serve to adopt it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that's the key, which is making it easy for them to adopt. What was would you say the general pattern? One was like people who are on standard HTTP gRPC services, you went with them first, and you mentioned like other protocols you took on later, and planned how to get them on. Are you seeing any patterns now in terms of which teams are adopting first versus resistance to adopt? And how should other people think about like which applications and what kind of services I bring to mesh first?
I think, in general, HTTP gRPC you get a lot of benefit with using service mesh. So that's it's a no-brainer for most folks to adopt it. With TCP, it has gotten, over the past year, we've been able to work with, let's say, HBase or Cassandra type of stacks and onboard them onto mesh. But they do have a lot more things that they still do on their own when compared to HTTP gRPC services.
Mm-hmm.
Redis is another one. We do use service mesh for Redis as well. That was from the beginning. That's been the way.
Yeah. So protocols is one dimension, right? Was like environment and compute platform a dimension. Like you mentioned VM bare metal, like Salesforce. I can imagine you'll have everything given the scale. Was the Kubernetes teams who came first? Do you have VM, like teams on VM on the mesh?
Yeah, so when our journey started about 5 or 6 years ago with mesh, our monolith actually in our first party data centers runs on bare metal, not even on VMs. It runs on bare metal. So so our first requirement was making we had done, if we didn't make bare metal successful, there was no story. So we had to make bare metal successful with Kubernetes at that time. So those were the two things we focused on. But since then, on our public cloud infrastructure, we are adopting Kubernetes more and more for different types of use cases. So there is that explosion that's happening. We do support VM-based services, but we highly encourage Kubernetes as a compute platform, but we do support VMs. And even within VMs, we support Linux-based VMs, but there are some Windows-based VMs that would love to use mesh, but we don't have support for it today. So therefore, we run in a hybrid mode there, where the clients, if they are running on on Kubernetes, are able to adopt client side, they're able to adopt mesh technology, but on the server side, it's an external service. So Windows VMs are configured differently. Because we don't support that. Yeah, so it's a combination.
Yeah, I think we need to do as a community do more around Windows support to be a little bit more first class. I know work's happening, but not enough.
Yes.
So that's great. So in terms of so great. So you have teams in many teams in production. You said especially in public cloud. How is it looking now? So if you look at the state of the world now, are you seeing what is the next level of challenges for adoption? Are you seeing a lot of multi-cluster traffic and scenarios? And is that something you've already solved for, or is that something you're looking to solve for?
Yeah, we do support multi-cluster mesh. We've adopted it, but not but I expect that adoption to grow pretty significantly in the coming months. But we do support multi-cluster, and the way and our strategy has been mesh as a layer on. So in a network that's a flat network with no overlapping IP addresses, we may choose to have multiple Kubernetes clusters for various reasons. But then we would like to leverage mesh on top of it as a single mesh without abstracting the fact that you're running on multiple Kubernetes clusters. So that's how we are deployed. So even if you're in a simple example of two different clusters, if you have a client and a service running in two different clusters, we are set up so that there is no ingress egress in the middle. You still can use service mesh based communication.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So direct pod to pod kind of.
Yes, and
okay.
And we're able to do that because we have a globally unique workload identity for our services, so it doesn't matter where it runs. So that's within a flat network, but obviously we don't have one flat network for everything that we run. When it is multiple networks, then we have ingress and egress in between. Yeah.
Right. So that's an interesting direction. So which is, how do you partition? Is it like, are these multiple networks? Is one sort of form of isolation? But within networks, because you'll have like multiple teams within that, how do you actually do some kind of isolation or safety of operations between them?
We have controls around, resource constraints and who can use around usage of the compute platform itself. We also implement zero trust, so it doesn't matter which team owns a set of services. It's at a workload level. You have to we authorize requests. So it shouldn't matter whether the service is running within the same cluster or different clusters. The reason we may split up into multiple clusters is to reduce blast radius of the compute platform or whatever other reasons that you might choose. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, because that's another question that I get quite a bit in terms of managing tenancy in shared clusters, and then overlaying a mesh on top, and then how are people managing that?
Yeah, so we have a whole infrastructure for multi-tenant Kubernetes clusters. Let's say you have two teams that are using the same cluster. Namespaces are actually associated with specific teams. Like if I am a team that owns service A, I own the namespace of that service. So therefore that's how it's split up. And there is a whole process around how you get assigned
how you get assigned to that. Yeah.
But so you own the namespace, and so there's that. I forget what where you're going with this.
The tenancy is what you were talking about, right?
So that's more static, right? Like as in where we are today, our cluster tenancy is pretty static in the sense that a team says you want a namespace, you get allocated one, and you can deploy your services to it, and you get a workload identity that's globally unique, but also tied to that namespace. So that's static, but we are starting to explore dynamic clusters where you don't need to know beforehand you don't need to assign it to a particular team, and how do you deal with that? We're starting to explore that option this year. And how do we ensure zero trust? How do we ensure, that we don't step on each other's toes when we build out that infrastructure? That's something that we're exploring in the coming months.
That's looking ahead. Okay. So as you look ahead, what are the other major, milestone challenges ahead for you? Either so this seems like one of them. What are the other big problems that you see ahead for you at Salesforce, but specifically in the context of this project?
So I think I mentioned this before. Right now we sort of apply default configuration for a lot of things, and we kind of allow you to change some things, but not a lot. But now, as our adoption has grown, there's a need to make more types of configuration. Give it to the service owners to manage on their own. So we're starting to explore how can we make some types of configuration self-serve, but have appropriate guardrails in place. And it's an evolving process for us to kind of build more integrations for authentication authorization. We support some JOT validation integrations, but there's more that we would like to support over time. Multi-cluster, we talked about that already, so just evolving that over time. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, we have started to use WebAssembly for a couple of use cases. Expect that as we adopt mesh for more types of use cases, Salesforce, being a multi-tenant product, has pretty complex traffic shifting requirements and authentication authorization requirements. So I see that we might, use WebAssembly or solve for that in various ways. So that is something that we expect to evolve. We don't use Envoy for egress capabilities today. We use a different software, our legacy egress gateway software. We hope to change that to Envoy at some point, and essentially Istio egress gateway. That's in. Yeah, those are some of the.
Yeah, that's quite a set. So you touched upon WebAssembly. What do you think about its readiness and maturity for prime time adoption at some a place like Salesforce?
We are pretty early. It's hard. So what we have done so far is build out a very basic SDLC around it, so that let's say that you're a WebAssembly developer, you should be able to own the code that you wrote for that WebAssembly, and then deploy and have it go through the different stages to all the way to production on your own. But then as we build out our stack and upgrade Istio, for example, we should not break you. Break that integration. So we have kind of built that out. We're piloting it with a couple of plugins. However, it's still they are very simple use cases at the moment. I've seen that if we want to sort of build more complex use cases, we've run into some issues. I don't have the details per se right now. But I'm hoping that'll, we'll smoothen that out over time.
Right. What language people are mostly writing in, like Rust?
We've tried both C++ and Golang.
Golang. Okay.
Yeah, because those are the two that seem to have good support at that time. I haven't checked in the last couple of months, but when we started off with it, those were the two languages that seem to have good support.
Got it. Cool. So changing gears a little bit, what do you do for ingress? Are you just using Istio Gateway? Are you doing something else?
Yeah, so that's another thing that happened over the past, couple of years is our first party still uses F5s, but as part of our public cloud infrastructure, we shifted to using Istio Ingress Gateway, and that's been a big part of our adoption too, to be able to use Envoy as a modern L7 load balancer. Has been awesome. We've also built out a whole workflow around that for provisioning, DNS, public certificates, so that you can, light up a WIP at the ingress. So yes, we are absolutely using Istio Ingress Gateway.
Got it. Cool. So if you look at, I mean, you have been at it for like since the beginning, from what I recall, almost like 4 years or maybe.
Since 2018, I think, end of 2018.
Yeah. Almost. Yeah. So someone is probably one of the most earliest adopters, and so now have seen some maturity and stabilization. Like the other often asked question is like, so what is the business benefit of mesh? I know you mentioned security, resiliency, and agility as those three pillars. Do you see that those were met before and after? And is there any measurement, value measurement that has started to happen, quantitative, qualitative, mix, some form that you can attribute to before and after adoption of Istio? Because I think we as a community we need more of those from the early adopters, just to let other newer people know that that's what it can give you.
Yeah, I think we don't have a measurement before because we kind of adopted mesh pretty early on, along with our microservices, our moving towards a service-oriented architecture. So I don't have a measure before, but I can certainly say that in the beginning, where we may have had some folks that might say, no, MTLS is easy, we'll just do it on our own, or resiliency, we'll figure it out on our own, have run into issues and said, no, yes, we would like to adopt mesh. So we have definitely, I think for a lot of the new services that we have built out, it has become almost a no-brainer to adopt mesh. And because we again, going back, those trust being our number one value in itself is a big deal as to why we would adopt it. But even the existing sort of legacy services that might not be using mesh have, as part of their evolution, have realized that no, we need to move, we need to evolve.
Got it. Right. So given your like trust and security as your number one reason, and you also mentioned this globally unique service identity, you must have had to partner very closely with security teams.
Yes.
The security side of.
Yes, we continue to partner with several teams in security. And yes, both from the initial, when we designed what we were going to do towards this, how are we going to adopt mesh to meet some of those goals? And it's a continuous, collaboration with them over time. So yes, absolutely. They are one of our key stakeholders and partners to make this successful. And remember, trust is not just security; it's also availability, right? That's where the great features that mesh has for resilience come into play. And then I think I didn't quite mention this before. Even with observability, we've partnered with our monitoring, the team the cloud that owns the monitoring system, to kind of use Envoy telemetry to automatically generate client perceived golden health signals for all of our services. So if you onboard onto Mesh, you generate these golden signals about your your request rate, your error rate, etc. automatically. That's a big value too, on value add on top of what Mesh gives you for a service, because they don't have to think about it then.
Yeah, just automatically lights up dashboards for them. So for somebody adopting new or looking at it now, what would you recommend their approach be? Like, they should first partner with the security teams and agree on the approach, and then find like the app partner teams who are on HTTP zone. Most of it is that anyway. So and then go that way. Like, what would you recommend someone new adopting now as an approach?
Yeah, I think finding what's the most important, the business driver for why what is it that you're trying to change, identifying that, and then partnering with security, definitely, because that usually is one of the top primary reasons why you would adopt it, and security tends to be a priority for most companies. And keeping it simple, right? Mesh, its technology is pretty. There's lots of things that you can do with it. It's complex, but keeping it simple for your service owners from the beginning, and controlled and intentional adoption to meet your immediate goals, and then incrementally going from there is what I'd say. And and if you're building this out for service owners, making it easy for them. I can't stress enough on that. Like all the best practices, what should be by default, they should just work, versus service owners having to do thinking on their own.
Yeah. And you took that on for all the way from like homegrown control plane to Istio, to like kept their interface and experience the same, right?
Yeah. So from our migration from our in-house control plane to Istio, yes, as we were adopting Istio, one of the first things we did, even from the day one, is how do we make it easy for service owners to do this migration? We didn't make it seamless for them, because it wasn't possible to make it seamless for them. They still needed to do a little bit of work, but it was just a little bit of work, and that was key for us. So we took that migration into account from the get-go as we were adopting Istio.
Got it. So last one question that we get for like at scale around performance and latency, and looking at in kernel things, what would you say? What has been your experience around performance?
It's been really good. I think we haven't. That again is something that we have run as our adoption of Envoy grew. We run tests against some common scenarios, and we've tuned the Envoy configuration to meet those common scenarios. And we actually have we're a big company. We actually have a perf engineering team that we run continuous workloads to evaluate performance for some of our bigger stacks. So yes, that's a continuous process that happens, and we get feedback from that. It's been pretty good. It's usually for the more complex use cases that we have to do more digging into, but for microservices, for the most part, it's been pretty good.
Awesome. That's great. I don't know if we have any. I didn't actually even look at the comment side. I don't know if people have any questions they could ask, or Eitan, if you have any questions, you can chime in as well.
Yes, I'd love to. As a matter of fact, I've been listening intently, and I think I'm trying to extrapolate lessons from this conversation, which I find fascinating. And the first observation is that it really seems like, sometimes when you try to tackle a new problem, you think, okay, it's just something you're going to do and make it happen, and then there it is. But I sense it's the exact opposite. That is, it's a process of continuous improvement that you're starting at some point, but it's never really finished. You're trying to figure out how to onboard more services, and it's a multi-dimensional problem as well. It's not just bringing on the teams, but making sure that you're able to upgrade the platform, solving the whole tenancy problem, and doing it very carefully, and figuring out the way forward. I find that fascinating. Another observation is the fact that it's much more of an integration problem that I've realized in the first place. That is, you have to look at where you are, where your workloads are running, and how you're going to give them a path into this sort of new platform that you're making available to them. For the benefit of our audience, I also want to make sure, I mentioned in past episodes, we touched on some of these topics and some we didn't. And so what I'd like to do is just together, for the sake, again, of our audience, if you're curious to want to learn more about some of the things we touched on in this episode that we haven't talked about in past episodes. One of them is, by the way, one of the sections I love the most is the operations section. And in one of the initial documents that sort of bring you into this whole topic of operation is deployment models. And I find this particular article that I'm sharing with you on the screen rather interesting. And I think we've sort of assumed that our audience knows what we're talking about here, but there are many dimensions to this problem. You can deploy Istio on a single cluster. You can have a combination of clusters and VMs. You can have multi-cluster. You can have multiple meshes, multiple networks. So it's really hard at first, and I think this document really helps you if you're to at least get the lay of the land before you start deciding how to go forward. And I suppose it's probably good advice to say start small, start simple, and then build on top of that based on what you learn along the way. Is that is a safe assumption to make?
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think Pratima nailed that on the head in the sense, keep it simple and go for the first business win, and then go to other teams, go more complicated after that, and get your team partners. You will need your team partners, like security teams in different companies, right? Like she mentioned observability. I've heard like app infra, app operations, like whatever that operational team is, you will need support from them as well. So get them on board, and then go at it. And I think be pretty successful after that. The one thing, Pratima, I didn't get to, we often say about mesh is the agility aspect of like, hey, if you were to do this in code, this would be like way more expensive to build, and let alone like way more expensive to maintain. Is that something you think within Salesforce there's a realization for now?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of our has been part of our education as we have started to educate people about the value of using service mesh. One of the values being that if you were to do it in your code, it's really hard to evolve it. And that's one of the key benefits of mesh, is that you're able to solve for your immediate need right away, but you're able to evolve that. Let's say it's an authorization or authentication authorization integration. You're able to evolve that independent of all the services that are using it. And that integration can actually be owned by a different team because of that, and you're able to make fast progress on that. we would have a distributed nightmare if we had, code embedded in hundreds of services or thousands of services that you then had to like make changes to. So that's one of our, North Star goal is that move as much as possible to this infrastructure. Some things are harder to do because we have, our software has been running for like 20 years. So it's hard to move some of them. It's a journey, but some others we've adopted it, and it's been going really well.
Yeah. I think that key thing you mentioned there is the ability to change across the fleet, right? Like, it's so difficult in a distributed setup if everything is in code. Like, even simple things like TLS version become like huge projects, right? Like, I've heard from people, just that being like a debate and a months and years of projects, which is pretty easy in this world.
Yeah, it's funny, one of our teams, one of our services wasn't using Mesh, and they filed hundreds of tickets to each of their clients when when they needed an upgrade to happen. So that right there is the value, and you're having to deal with those hundreds of tickets, work with services, teams across the company to make those changes. Versus if you're using Mesh, it's just you can do it on your own and make it deployed everywhere. You don't have to engage with hundreds of service owners to make that happen. That was a good learning for that team.
Guys, I do see a question did pop up in the comments section. I'm going to put it up here on the screen from Abdul Basit. He's asking, do you use a network-based segmentation, for example, DMZ via firewall, or are you purely using Istio Zero Trust model with everything sharing same network?
We do use a combination of both for defense and depth. So yes, we do use a combination of both.
Okay. Wonderful. I hope that answers your question, Abdul. Thank you for posting in the comments. Any last minute reflections that you want to share with the audience, Pratima or Varun?
No, I'm good. I think this was a good conversation. I think some of these stories need to come out of wins and what teams felt. I think your anecdote of like hundreds of tickets before and not having to do that after is a good, these kind of stories need to come out. These nuggets exist in every organization, right? But it's hard to sort of get them out there in the public. So yeah, any form or shape, Pratima, if you can, blog, write, talk about it, meme about it, will be good, because I think people want to get to those. No, otherwise, I think, thank you so much for coming and, giving us time and talking to the audience about your journey. I think it was pretty interesting for us to hear.
Yes, thank you. All right, guys. Thank you for coming on. I'll take it from here. I guess you could say goodbye to our audience. Now I'll wrap up with a few announcements.
Thanks, Eitan.
Bye. So let's discuss just a few final moments. Thank you again for our guests for coming on. I hope you found this conversation apropos and interesting and helpful in the context of the work that you're doing. As an epilogue to this conversation, I wanted to put on your radar the fact that Salesforce has an engineer, Ramesh Javali, who is going to be presenting a session at the upcoming Istio Con. This is Monday, April 25th, where he discusses advanced use cases of Istio. And so I hope you'll be able to join. This is online for that session, and sort of pick up from this conversation we just wrapped up. As for us at Tetrate Tech Talks, before we sort of adjourn until next week, I wanted to let you know what we have coming up in the coming weeks. Next week, I will have the pleasure to interview Lucas Ponce, who is a committer with the Kiali project. I think most of us who work with Service Mesh are familiar with Kiali, but if you aren't, go ahead and check out their website, kiali.io. and we'll do a demo and explore that tool together. The following week is the week of Istio Con, so we'll have a bye week. And then the week after, I'm also have the pleasure to say that a former good friend of mine, Brian Sletton, well, I guess he's still a good friend of mine, the author of WebAssembly, The Definitive Guide from O'Reilly, is going to join us May 6th to talk about WebAssembly and the promise of that technology in the coming months and years. And final reminder, our Slack channel, tetratecommunity.slack.com, is one that I cannot underemphasize. It's basically a direct line of communication to many of us Tetrans and our engineers specifically. So if you have a question about certification, if you have a question about our workshops, if you just want to know more about Service Mesh, reach out. This is probably the path of least resistance to actually get the attention of any of us Tetrans out here to have some great conversations, which we've had in the last week, I'm happy to say. There was a comment and a nice thread about wanting to see in a future episode a conversation about multi-cluster deployments. And so that's, I'm in the middle of cooking up a demo demonstrating how you do that, and it's actually a perfect segue from some of the past demos that we've done. We'll sort of be building up and talking about multi-cluster. All right, so we're just a little bit above top of the hour. I hope you found this interesting. Again, don't hesitate to contact us, and I hope we see you next week and our next episode. All right, well, goodbye, everyone.